Andrei Chikatilo. For 12 years, someone was taking lives along the railway lines and bus depots of southern Russia. The victims, runaways, homeless individuals, young women, were found in wooded areas near train stations, bearing wounds so extreme that investigators initially believed multiple perpetrators must be responsible. Between December 1978 and November 1990, 52 people were confirmed taken by a single man. His name was Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, and for over a decade, the Soviet system itself helped him stay free. How does one person operate for 12 years across an entire region, leaving behind forensic evidence at every scene, and still evade an investigation involving over 150,000 interviews? Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in the Ukrainian SSR, into the aftermath of the Holodomor, the devastating famine caused by Stalin's forced collectivization that took millions of lives. His family were collective farm laborers, living in a one-room hut, receiving no wages, surviving on grass and leaves. He later said he did not eat bread until he was 12 years old. His mother told him repeatedly that an older brother named Stepan had been taken and consumed by starving neighbors, a claim that was never verified but shaped his psychology profoundly. His father, Roman, was conscripted into the Red Army during World War II and taken prisoner by the Germans, which branded the entire family as potential traitors in post-war Soviet society. Between 1941 and 1944, young Andrei witnessed the horrors of Nazi occupation, bombings, fires, and shootings. He was a chronic bedwetter, for which his mother beat him mercilessly. Despite everything, he became an excellent student and an ardent communist, serving as school newspaper editor and chairman of the Pupils' Communist Party Committee. He obtained a degree in Russian literature from Rostov University. He married Feodosia Odnacheва in 1963. He became a teacher. But Chikatilo suffered from a condition that would define everything that followed: chronic impotence that deepened his self-hatred throughout his life. His first relationship ended when the woman publicly humiliated him over it. As a teacher, he was wholly ineffective, unable to maintain discipline, mocked by students. After mounting complaints about his conduct toward pupils, his teaching career ended in March 1981. He took a factory supply clerk position that required extensive travel across the Soviet Union by rail, giving him access to victims at stations and depots across the country. His targets were among the most vulnerable people in Soviet society: runaways, homeless individuals, and young women encountered at transit points. He lured them to secluded wooded areas alongside railway lines. Unable to achieve arousal through normal means, he found a substitute through the act of stabbing itself. His mutilations were extensive: removal of organs, disembowelment, and cannibalization. The investigation, dubbed Operation Forest Path, was one of the largest criminal investigations in Soviet history. It was led by forensic analyst Viktor Burakov, who devoted 7 years of his life to the case. Over 150,000 people were interviewed across the region. The task force incidentally solved 1,062 unrelated crimes along the way, a staggering number that illustrates the sheer scale of the operation. Psychiatrist Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky created a remarkably accurate criminal profile, describing the person responsible as a necro-sadist who was middle-aged, married, and socially inept. The profile was nearly perfect. But the single most catastrophic error came not from detective work, it came from biology itself. Chikatilo had an extraordinarily rare biological anomaly. His blood type was A, but his bodily secretions typed as a B. When he was arrested in 1984, 6 years into his spree, and his blood was tested against the AB type evidence found at crime scenes, the results did not match. He was eliminated as a suspect and released. It was the investigation's most devastating forensic failure. 6 more years followed. Dozens more lives were taken, and an innocent man, Alexander Kravchenko, had already been convicted and executed for Chikatilo's very first act, a wrong that could never be undone. Soviet ideology made the problem far worse. Serial predators were officially considered a Western phenomenon, impossible under communism. Authorities suppressed information about the cases and refused to acknowledge any pattern. Decentralized Soviet policing meant different jurisdictions did not share evidence, even when victims were found across multiple regions. Disappearances of vulnerable people routinely went unreported, and brutal interrogation methods produced false confessions from innocent suspects, sending investigators down dead ends while the real person responsible continued operating. Chikatilo was finally arrested on November 20th, 1990, after being spotted behaving suspiciously near where his final victim was found. Psychiatrist Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky coaxed a full confession. Chikatilo led police to undiscovered remains and reenacted every act at the scenes. His trial opened April 14, 1992 at Rostov Provincial Court. Held in a specially constructed iron cage to protect him from victims' relatives, his behavior was erratic, singing, exposing himself, cursing the judge. On October 14, 1992, he was found guilty of 52 counts and sentenced to the ultimate penalty. After appeals were rejected, Chikatilo was executed on February 14, 1994, with a single gunshot at Novocherkassy prison. He was buried in an unmarked grave. His case forced the Soviet and Russian government to publicly acknowledge that predators of this kind could exist under communism. Chikatilo operated for 12 years because the system refused to believe he could exist. But the next case involves someone who did not just evade the system. He was the system. A police officer who used his badge, his uniform, and his patrol car to find victims for nearly 20 years. Mikhail Popkov. Mikhail Viktorovich Popkov is, by confirmed numbers, the most prolific individual offender in modern Russian history. As of late 2025, he has been convicted of approximately 91 separate acts across 5 trials, with authorities believing the actual total may approach 200. He operated for nearly 20 years, from 1992 to 2011, primarily in and around the Siberian city of Angarsk in the Irkutsk region. And for most of that time, he was a serving police officer. He wore his uniform. He drove his patrol car. He offered women rides home late at night. And the women who accepted those rides trusted him because he was the law. Popkov grew up in Angarsk after his family moved from Norilsk. He married a fellow police officer named Elena and had one daughter, Ekaterina. Colleagues described him as charming, funny, and the life of the party. He claimed his wife had an affair, which he cited as the catalyst for what followed. He said he wanted to cleanse the streets of women he deemed immoral, those going out alone at night or appearing intoxicated. His victims were almost exclusively women, ranging in age from 16 to 50, plus one male police officer. He used his position to offer late-night rides home. Women who accepted had no reason to suspect the uniformed man behind the wheel. He drove them to remote locations across the vast Siberian landscape, forests, isolated roadsides, abandoned cemeteries, and used whatever was available: knives, axes, hammers, baseball bats, screwdrivers, ropes. Some victims were stabbed up to 170 times. He committed acts of necrophilia and extensive mutilation, earning the terrifying nickname, the Werewolf. He reportedly helped himself to weapons from the police evidence room, The very items used in criminal investigations became his tools. His insider knowledge of forensic procedures allowed him to avoid the mistakes that typically expose perpetrators. His wife Elena, also a law enforcement officer, unknowingly provided alibis. And the era worked in his favor. The 1990s in Siberia were defined by rampant organized crime and widespread societal collapse. So individual disappearances and acts went unnoticed in the broader chaos. The pattern was first noticed in the mid-1990s, but identifying the person behind it took nearly 2 decades. Investigators eventually zeroed in on a critical clue: recurring tire tracks from a Lada 4x4, a vehicle commonly used by law enforcement in the region. That realization shifted the investigation in a direction no one had anticipated. The predator might be one of their own. In 2012, investigators made the extraordinary decision to conduct DNA testing of approximately 3,500 current and former police officers across the entire Irkutsk region, one of the largest law enforcement DNA dragnets ever conducted. When the results came back, one name matched crime scene evidence from multiple locations. It was Popkov. He was arrested on June 23, 2012, in Vladivostok and, surprisingly, cooperated extensively from the moment he was taken into custody. What followed was a series of trials that stretched across more than a decade and continues to this day. He has been convicted 5 separate times, 22 counts and life imprisonment in January 2015, 56 additional counts and a second life sentence in December 2018, when he was also stripped of his police pension. 2 more in June 2021, 3 more in Primorsky region in November 2023, and another in August 2025, for a 2011 act, adding 9.5 more years. As of October 2025, a case involving 2 more acts from August 2008 was sent to court. He continues confessing to new incidents from his cell. In January 2023, he made headlines by asking to volunteer for military service in Ukraine, claiming his military specialization was in quite high demand. The request was denied. Popkov remains in a special regime colony in Mordovia. He is 61 years old, and investigators believe the true number of his victims may approach 200. Popkov used a badge and a patrol car to operate for 2 decades. But the next case involves someone who needed no authority at all, just a chessboard, a hammer, and Moscow's largest park. Alexander Pichushkin. Alexander Yuryevich Pichushkin kept a chessboard in his apartment. On it, he placed coins, 1 for each person he claimed to have taken. When police arrested him on June 16, 2006, 61 or 62 of the 64 squares were filled. His stated goal was to fill every square. He was convicted of 49 acts and 3 attempted acts. He later said the 64-square limit was a fiction. He would have continued indefinitely. Living without this, he told investigators, is like living without eating would be for you. Pichushkin was born on April 9, 1974, and grew up in a 5th-floor apartment on Kersonskaya Street in Moscow. 6 minutes walk from the northern end of Bitsa Park, the city's largest green space. The park would become the center of everything he did. As a young child, he fell backward off a swing, which struck him in the forehead on its return arc. Experts believe this damaged his frontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for impulse control, judgment, and aggression. The change in his behavior was immediate and dramatic. Previously sociable and friendly, he became hostile, impulsive, and prone to outbursts. He was bullied relentlessly by classmates and eventually transferred to a school for students with learning difficulties. His maternal grandfather became his lifeline, teaching him chess, encouraging intellectual growth, and giving him the one stable relationship in his life. Chess became his primary outlet for the aggression building inside him. When his grandfather passed during Pichushkin's teenage years, that outlet vanished. He returned to his mother's apartment and began consuming large quantities of vodka daily. He became fixated on Andrei Chikatilo, whose 1992 conviction for 52 acts created something in Pichushkin that investigators had rarely seen before. Not admiration, but competition. He wanted to surpass Chikatilo's number. The chessboard became his scoreboard. His first confirmed act was against a classmate in July 1992, when Pichushkin was 18. After sporadic incidents through 2000, his intensive period began in May 2001. He targeted predominantly elderly homeless men and those struggling with alcohol dependency in and around Bitsa Park, offering them vodka and companionship, claiming to be visiting his deceased dog's grave. His primary method was hammer blows to the back of the skull, always from behind. After October 2005, he began leaving empty vodka bottles inserted into victims' wounds. Over 40 bodies were reportedly disposed of in the park's sewer system. His final victim was Marina Moskaliova, a 36-year-old co-worker in June 2006. Before leaving home that evening, she left a note for her son saying she was going for a walk with someone named Sasha, and she left Pichushkin's phone number on the note. It was the first time he had targeted someone who could be directly traced back to him. A metro transit ticket found in her possession led investigators to surveillance footage showing her walking with Pichushkin just hours before she was found. He was arrested on June 16, 2006. Unlike many in his position, he did not deny anything. He confessed happily and in extensive detail, showing no remorse whatsoever. His trial opened September 13, 2007, at Moscow City Court. Held behind a glass cage for the proceedings, he described each act with immense pride, as though recounting achievements rather than confessions. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the first 15 years to be served in solitary confinement. Pichushkin is currently held at the Polar Owl Penal Colony near Karp, close to the Arctic Circle, one of the harshest facilities in the Russian prison system. In April 2025, he announced readiness to confess to 11 additional acts. In August 2025, he demanded 100,000 rubles from the prison service for what he called moral suffering caused by the extreme Arctic climate. His requests for transfer to a colony closer to Moscow have been repeatedly denied. Experts suggest his ongoing confessions may be driven by the desire for temporary escape from the isolation, because each confession requires transport to the scene for investigation reenactments. Pichushkin turned a chessboard into a scoreboard and a public park into a hunting ground. But the next case is darker still, because it involves not just one person, but a mother and son working together inside a single apartment. Alexander Spasivtsev. On October 26, 1996, plumbers arrived at an apartment building in Novokuznetsk, in Russia's Kemerovo Oblast, to investigate clogged sewage pipes in the building. The blockage led them to a specific unit. When police forced entry into the apartment, they encountered a scene that hardened investigators described as the worst they had ever witnessed. A dismembered, headless body in the bathtub, a human rib cage lying on the living room floor, and body parts scattered throughout every room. Amid the horror, they found a 15-year-old girl named Olya Galtseva, still alive but barely, severely emaciated with multiple stab wounds covering her body. She had been held captive for approximately a month. She provided crucial testimony to investigators before passing 3 days later from peritonitis. Police recovered 82 articles of stained clothing belonging to different victims and nearly 40 pieces of jewelry, each piece representing a life that had ended inside those walls. A neighbor had called police months earlier, complaining of a terrible smell coming from the apartment. Police never responded. Alexander Nikolaevich Spesivtsev was born on March 1, 1970, in Novokuznetsk. His father was an abusive alcoholic who eventually abandoned the family entirely. His mother, Lyudmila Spesivtseva, worked at a school and at the local prosecutor's office. And from a very young age, she regularly showed her son photographs of remains from criminal case files. She shared a bed with him until he was 12. He grew up completely friendless, bullied constantly, and showing escalating fixations on harming others. In 1988, when his first girlfriend attempted to end their relationship, he held her captive for a month until she passed from infection. For this, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and sent to the Oriol Special Psychiatric Hospital. After approximately 3 years of treatment, he was discharged with what doctors described as signs of remission. But here is where a bureaucratic failure turned lethal. No proper discharge records were ever filed. Law enforcement databases still showed Spesivtsev as confined in the psychiatric facility. That meant when bodies began surfacing and investigators compiled suspect lists, his name never appeared. The system believed he was locked up. He was not. He was living in an apartment in Novokuznetsk with his mother. And what was happening inside that apartment would not be discovered until a plumber came to fix the pipes. Between March and September 1996, Spesivtsev and his mother operated together from that apartment, luring victims in off the streets and from train stations by offering food and shelter. Lyudmila was the face of the operation. She would approach vulnerable people, many of them young individuals living on the margins of a society in collapse, and pretend to need help carrying shopping bags or offer a warm meal. Once victims entered the apartment, they were trapped. A fierce dog inside prevented any escape. At least 15 people were confirmed to have lost their lives inside those walls. The conditions were beyond description. Captives were restrained, harmed repeatedly over days and weeks, and in some cases forced to participate in the disposal of those who came before them. Due to extreme poverty, Spesivtsev had begun preparing and consuming human remains as a source of food. Lyudmila disposed of evidence by making trips to the Aba River at night, dumping remains under the cover of darkness. A psychiatric evaluation declared Spesivtsev legally insane, and on October 5, 1999, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital rather than a prison. His mother, Lyudmila, was tried separately and sentenced to 13 years for her role as an accomplice. A sentence many felt was far too lenient given her direct participation in luring victims. In May 2024, a Kemerovo court reviewed the evidence, confirmed his involvement in 15 proven cases, and ordered his continued compulsory psychiatric treatment. In January 2025, a court awarded 1 million rubles in moral compensation to the daughter of one of his victims. As of December 2025, Spesivtsev had not paid. He reportedly spends his days writing poems about the evils of democracy. Staff at the facility describe him as no longer aware of where he is or what he has done. Authorities believe the actual number of those who perished inside his apartment may exceed 80. There is no indication he will ever leave that facility. A mother and son operated from a single apartment, and a neighbor's complaint about the smell was ignored for months. But the next case involves someone who hid behind a different kind of mask, charm, courtesy, and a face that women trusted enough to accept a ride from a stranger. Vladimir Mirgorod. Between 2000 and 2004, women were being found across northern and northeastern Moscow. All of them strangled, all of them tied up, all of them having suffered harm before their lives were taken. Investigators eventually linked 32 separate acts to a single individual. Despite growing media reports of a pattern in the city, Russia's Interior Minister Boris Gryzlov publicly denied that a serial predator was active in Moscow. The acts continued. Vladimir Viktorovich Mirgorod was born on November 1st, 1979, and grew up in Moscow's Timiryazev district near the Petrovsko-Razumovskaya metro station. He enrolled at the Moscow Institute of Steel and Alloys, but dropped out. Despite what investigators later described as very charismatic, charming, and courteous behavior that enabled him to easily gain women's trust, something far darker lived beneath the surface. He met victims on streets, in parks, or near metro stations, sometimes offering rides or sharing drinks. He overpowered and restrained them, harmed them, then strangled them using belts, cords, scarves, or other ligatures. All victims perished from asphyxia. Survivors described him as a man whose eyes turned glassy during the act. One survivor credited her martial arts training for helping her fight him off for 20 minutes. How does someone take 32 lives across a major world capital, one of the most surveilled cities in Russia, over 4 years, while the government publicly denies he exists? That denial cost lives. Every week, the Interior Minister told the public there was no pattern. The person responsible had another week to operate. The act stopped in late 2004, not because Mirgorod was identified, not because the investigation closed in, but because he was arrested for a completely unrelated offense and sentenced to 6 years. For 6 years, he sat in a cell while dozens of unsolved cases gathered dust in filing cabinets across Moscow. Upon his release in July 2010, something had changed. His fingerprints were entered into a newly digitized national database and immediately matched prints recovered from 4 separate scenes. The technology that caught him did not exist when the crimes were committed. He initially confessed to 8. DNA evidence proved 16. In January 2012, Moscow City Court convicted him of those 16 counts and sentenced him to life imprisonment. But the investigation did not end with that first conviction. A second, painstaking round of forensic work, utilizing DNA technology and digital evidence analysis that had not been available during the original crime spree, proved 16 additional acts dating back to 2000, doubling the confirmed total to 32. On December 9th, 2025, the Moscow City Court upheld a second life sentence on appeal, making him one of very few people in Russian history to receive 2 separate life terms from the same court. Mirgorod himself has offered a chilling assessment of his own history, telling investigators, "I've had hundreds of women, but I can't tell you who I strangled and who lived." A statement that suggests the true scope of what he did may be considerably larger than even 32. He continues providing details of additional episodes from his cell at Snezhinka Colony in the remote Khabarovsk Krai region of Russia's Far East. He is 46 years old, and investigators are still listening. Mirgorod operated across Moscow for 4 years while the government denied he existed, and a fingerprint database that did not yet exist is what finally identified him. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. But the next case spans an even wider geography, 15 cities across 2 federal districts, and the person responsible targeted the most vulnerable population imaginable. Radik Tagirov. Between March 2011 and September 2012, Somis, a span of just 18 months. Elderly women across the Volga and Ural regions of Russia were being found in their own apartments, strangled with items from their own homes. Bathrobe belts, clotheslines, iron cords. The person responsible posed as a utility company employee or a social worker to gain entry, sometimes scouting buildings days in advance. He wore gloves and sterilized crime scenes to throw off forensic analysis. By the time investigators realized the cases were connected, 31 women between the ages of 75 and 90 had been taken across 15 different cities, including Kazan, Samara, Saratov, Ufa, Perm, and Nizhny Novgorod. 31 elderly women, 15 cities, 18 months, all by one man pretending to read their gas meter. How does someone knock on that many doors, across that many cities, and never once get caught in the act? Radik Tajirovich. Tajirov was born in May 1982 in what was then the Tatar ASSR, now the Republic of Tatarstan. He had a neglectful upbringing and reportedly lost all contact with his mother during his teenage years. A rupture that left him without any stable family connection for the rest of his life. He trained as a locksmith in Kazan, married, and had children. But the marriage disintegrated. His criminal record included a 2005 conviction for illegal arms trafficking and a 2009 conviction for theft and robbery. After his release in 2009, he did not return to any community. He lived as a vagrant, drifting between cities across the Volga and Ural regions, sleeping rough, carrying no identification, maintaining no fixed address, and holding no employment. That rootlessness was not just a lifestyle, it was a strategy. He could arrive in a city, spend a day or two studying a building and its residents, knock on a door, take a life, and vanish before any local investigation had even begun. By the time police in one city realized what had happened, he was already 300 kilometers away, scouting his next target. The investigation was staggering in its scale, one of the largest serial crime investigations in post-Soviet Russian history. Investigators examined over 10,000 potential suspects across the Volga and Ural federal districts and conducted more than 5,000 separate forensic studies. DNA analysis confirmed definitively that every single act across all 15 cities was committed by one individual. The same genetic profile appeared at scene after scene. A 3 million ruble reward was offered in 2017, broadcast widely across the affected regions, but no useful tips materialized. Tagirov remained invisible. He was finally arrested on December 1st, 2020, in Kazan, after a combination of DNA evidence and shoe print analysis identified him. During interrogation, he broke down in tears and confessed to at least 25 of the acts, providing details about specific apartments, specific victims, and specific methods that left no doubt. On March 21, 2024, the Supreme Court of Tatarstan sentenced Tagirov to life imprisonment, despite having wept and confessed to at least 25 of the acts during the investigation. Providing details that only the person responsible could know, he reversed course entirely at trial. He denied all charges, claiming he had slandered himself under stress during interrogation and that his confessions were coerced. The court was unmoved. The DNA evidence linking him to scenes across 15 cities was conclusive and irrefutable. On December 25, 2025, the Supreme Court of Russia upheld the verdict on final appeal, dismissing his cassation and closing every legal avenue available to him. He will spend the remainder of his natural life behind bars. The women he targeted were among the most vulnerable people in Russian society, elderly, living alone in modest apartments, trusting enough to open their doors to a man who said he was from the utility company. That trust was weaponized 31 times across 15 cities in 18 months. Tagirov drifted between cities like a ghost, targeting women who had no reason to suspect the man at their door. But the next case is different in almost every way, because the perpetrators were not drifters or loners. They were teenagers, and they filmed what they did. Artyom Anufriev and Nikita Litkin. Between November 2010 and April 2011, a span of roughly 5 months, residents of the Akademgorodok district of Irkutsk, Siberia, were being attacked from behind while walking alone at night. The assailants used mallets, hammers, baseball bats, and knives, delivering 15 to 20 blows per victim. 6 people were taken and 9 more were seriously harmed. Some incidents were filmed. In certain cases, the perpetrators mutilated victims after the fact and placed remains on public railings. Police failed to connect the attacks for months. The community lived in fear without knowing who was responsible. The answer, when it finally came, was almost impossible to believe. The attackers were not hardened criminals. They were 2 teenage outcasts who had found each other online and decided to turn their shared rage into something real. Artyom Alexandrovich Anufriev, born October 4, 1992, was raised without a father by a mother who reportedly told him from a young age to hate the people around him. Despite that poisonous upbringing, he showed genuine talent, excelling academically in literature and English, playing multiple musical instruments, and singing in a school music group. But socially, he was an outcast from first grade onward. He had no friends. He was mocked and excluded after being physically beaten by a group of peers over an online dispute. His behavior shifted decisively toward aggression. He briefly joined a white supremacist skinhead group, and he became fixated, obsessively, dangerously fixated, on Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard case from earlier on this list, going so far as to create an online group titled Pichushkin, Our President. Nikita Vakhtangovich Litkin, born March 24, 1993, was quieter, more withdrawn, and deeply damaged in his own way. His father, of Ossetian ethnicity, abandoned the family repeatedly throughout Litkin's childhood. At school, he was bullied mercilessly for 5 straight years, earning a cruel nickname, Jimbo, that followed him everywhere. He was expelled from his school and then from 2 separate colleges. By the time he met Anufriev online, he had no other relationships in his life. Anufriev became his entire world, his only friend, his only source of validation, his only connection to another human being. The dependency was total. Together they formed punk bands with deliberately offensive names, and they dedicated one of their albums to a notorious group of perpetrators from another Ukrainian city, declaring their intent to continue that group's work. The breakthrough came when Litkin's uncle discovered a video on a digital camera showing the mutilation of a body. He went straight to the authorities. Both were arrested on April 5, 2011, 2 days after their final act. The evidence was overwhelming: video recordings, physical evidence from multiple scenes, and confessions from both. At trial on April 2, 2013, Anufriev, who had been 18 during the incidents, received life imprisonment, making him one of the youngest people in Russian history to receive that sentence. Litkin, who was 17 at the time, received 24 years, later reduced to 20 on appeal. Their fates diverged sharply from that point. Anufriev was sent to IK-5 Fiery Island in Vologda Oblast, where he remains the facility's youngest inmate. He reportedly studies law remotely and has developed a disturbing online following. Litkin's path after conviction was darker still. Diagnosed with a severe mental disorder while in prison, he grew increasingly unstable and desperate. His one fixation, the only person who had ever meant anything to him, was Anufriev, who was housed in a different facility entirely. In a bizarre and tragic attempt to be reunited, Litkin deliberately harmed another inmate, hoping to receive a life sentence that would result in his transfer to the same high-security facility where Anufriev was being held. The plan failed. On November 30th, 2021, Nikita Litkin was found gone in his cell at Correctional Colony Number 7 in Angarsk. He had used a blade. He was 28 years old. The only friend he had ever known was locked in a cell 1,000 kilometers away, and he chose to stop living rather than continue without that connection. Two teenagers who met online turned a quiet Siberian neighborhood into a place of terror for 5 months. But the next case was carried out by a single person, on a single day, inside a single building, and it changed Russian law forever. Vladislav Roslyakov. On the morning of October 17, 2018, an 18-year-old student walked into Kerch Polytechnic College in Crimea through a rear entrance, deliberately avoiding a metal detector at the main door. He was carrying a legally purchased 12-gauge shotgun, 150 rounds of ammunition, and a homemade nail device packed with metal shrapnel. He wore a black jacket over a white shirt inscribed with the Russian word for hatred, deliberately mimicking the attire of one of the Columbine perpetrators. He detonated the device in the college canteen during lunchtime, then walked through corridors firing indiscriminately for over 15 minutes. 20 people were taken that day, 15 students and 5 staff members. Between 67 and 73 more were wounded, many with shrapnel injuries described by the health minister as muscles minced with small metal objects, and metal balls in kidneys, intestines, blood vessels. Teacher named Olga Grishchenko survived initially, but passed approximately 9 months later from complications, effectively bringing the toll to 21. The perpetrator retreated to the college library and ended his own life, mirroring the method of Eric Harris at Columbine. His mother, Galina, who worked at a nearby hospital, had been providing first aid to the wounded without knowing her son was responsible. What kind of preparation leads an 18-year-old to carry out the deadliest act of its kind in modern Russian history? Vladislav Igorovich Roslyakov was born on May 2, 2000, in the Arshintsevo area on the outskirts of Kerch. His father, Igor, a former soldier who had served in Afghanistan, sustained a severe head injury during his service that left him disabled. He turned to alcohol and became harmful toward the family. His parents separated when Vladislav was around 10 years old. His mother, Galina, who worked as a low-paid hospital orderly and was a practicing Jehovah's Witness, raised him in conditions of extreme control. She strictly limited his social interactions, searched his pockets regularly, and refused to allow him access to a computer until he was 16 years old. He was shy, deeply introverted, and had almost no friends. He enrolled at Kerch Polytechnic College in 2015 to train as an electrician, but reportedly despised the institution and felt isolated there. From approximately 2016 onward, once he gained internet access, Roslyakov became deeply embedded in online communities dedicated to mass perpetrators around the world. He adopted the username Vodka, the same nickname used by Dylan Klebold, one of the 2 Columbine perpetrators. He described Harris and Klebold as awesome and frequently searched for terms related to firearms, terror, and methods of causing mass harm. His online activity painted a clear picture of radicalization, but no one was monitoring it. The night before the incident, in what appears to have been a deliberate act of finality, he burned a Bible, his mobile phone, and other personal belongings. He was preparing to leave nothing behind. The investigative committee concluded on November 9, 2018, that Roslyakov acted alone. The finding was controversial. Many questioned how an 18-year-old could plan and execute an operation of this scale without anyone noticing. President Putin called the incident a result of globalization and publicly blamed American school incidents and the influence of social media, deflecting attention from Russia's own failures in monitoring radicalized youth and controlling access to weapons. Despite immediate proposals to raise the minimum age for purchasing firearms from 18 to 21, no meaningful legislative changes were passed in the aftermath of Kerch. The political will simply was not there. It took a second, directly related incident: the May 2021 school attack in Kazan, which was explicitly and openly inspired by Roslyakov, to finally push the age requirement to 21. By that time, many more had been harmed. The Kerch incident spawned multiple copycat attempts across Russia and in other countries, with the most recent confirmed incident occurring as recently as February 2026. Roslyakov's name and his methodology continue to circulate in the same dark corners of the internet where he himself was radicalized. One student, one building, one morning, and it changed Russian firearms law. But the next case is not about a lone individual at all. It is about an entire criminal organization that controlled a village, corrupted every level of local government, and carried out the most shocking act of mass harm in modern Russian criminal history. Sergei Tsapak and the Tsapak Gang. On November 4th, 2010, the anniversary of the passing of gang leader Nikolai Tsapak, a group of armed men entered the home of wealthy farmer Server Amatov in the village of Kushtyovskaya, Krasnodar Krai in southern Russia. Sergei Tsapak, Nikolai's younger brother and the organization's current leader, had long suspected Amatov of involvement in Nikolai's assassination 8 years earlier. What happened inside that farmhouse over the following hours was described by prosecutors and investigators as one of the most methodical and horrifying acts of mass harm in modern Russian criminal history. Every person inside the home was targeted. 12 people were taken, including Amatov, his wife, his daughter-in-law, his granddaughter, visiting entrepreneur Vladimir Mironenko's wife, their 2 young daughters, and Mironenko's in-laws. Most were stabbed. Several young victims were strangled. 1 young person perished from smoke inhalation. 2 entire families were erased in a single night. 12 people, including members of 2 separate families and several young ones, taken in a single house on a single night, in a village where everyone knew exactly who was responsible. And no one could do anything about it, because the gang owned the village. The Tsapak family had risen to power during the chaotic 1990s privatization era, when the collapse of the Soviet Union left a power vacuum across rural Russia that criminal organizations were only too happy to fill. Brothers Nikolai and Sergei formed their organization, known locally and fearfully as the Tsapki, around 1993. Over the next decade, they conducted mass extortion of local farmers and businesses, seized land by force, carried out kidnappings, and committed acts of harm with near total impunity. Their mother, Nadezhda Tsapak, controlled a vast agricultural empire called Artex Agro that spanned 30,000 hectares of farmland, making the family one of the largest landholders in the region. The legitimate business was inseparable from the criminal enterprise. Police, prosecutors, judges, and local government officials were either directly on the family's payroll or too terrified to challenge them. Tsapak reportedly gave a Mercedes-Benz to the local police chief as a gesture of goodwill. After Nikolai was assassinated in 2002, Sergei assumed leadership and took a more commercially sophisticated approach, merging the criminal operations with legitimate business structures. He was elected to the local village council. He reportedly attended President Medvedev's 2008 inauguration in Moscow. The massacre sparked a national outcry. Putin himself called it the failure of the entire law enforcement system. On November 19, 2013, a jury convicted Sergei Tsapok, Vladimir Alexeyev, known as Lawless, and Igor Chernik, sentencing each to life imprisonment. Vyacheslav Tsapoviaz received 20 years. But what followed the trial raised as many questions as it answered. A disturbing cluster of suspicious passings occurred in rapid succession. 2 accomplices ended their own lives in custody. Chernik was found hanging in his cell on July 4, 2014. And just 2 days later, on July 6th, Sergei Tsapok himself was found gone in pre-trial detention. The official cause was listed as stroke and acute heart failure. 4 connected individuals gone in quick succession. The pattern raised significant suspicions, though no foul play was ever officially confirmed. As for the remaining gang members, Vyacheslav Tsapoviaz caused a national scandal in November 2018 when photographs surfaced showing him eating crab and caviar in prison with a plasma television and mobile phone access. Kremlin spokesman Peskov called the images outrageous, disgusting. As of August 2024, Tsapoviaz was reportedly still enjoying privileged conditions. And Sergei Tsapok's daughter Anastasia, who changed her surname to Odeline Ferrer in 2021, was fined in 2025 for driving at 136 kilometers per hour in a 60 zone while intoxicated. She had 169 prior traffic fines. An entire village held hostage by one family for 2 decades. 12 people taken in a single night. And the gang leader found gone in his cell under circumstances no one fully believes. But the final case on this list brings us back to a single individual. A man from a small town in Penza Oblast who wanted to prove to his ex-girlfriend that he was not a weakling. Alexander Bychkov. Belinsky is a small town of roughly 8,000 people in Penza Oblast, deep in central Russia. It is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where nothing much happens, and where a stranger's face would be noticed immediately. But between September 2009 and January 2012, at least 9 men, elderly, alcoholic, homeless individuals unlikely to be missed, vanished from its streets. And the person responsible was not a stranger. He was a local. His name was Alexander Vladimirovich Bychkov. He called himself a lone wolf. And the reason he started was perhaps the most banal motivation on this entire list. Bychkov was born on April 1st, 1988, near Belinsky. Both parents were alcoholics who beat their children if they came home without money from odd jobs or scrap collecting. His father ended his own life by hanging at the age of 40. His brother Sergei suffered a severe traumatic brain injury after being thrown from a moving car, forcing Alexander to leave his studies to provide care. Then came the moment that, by his own account, set everything in motion. His girlfriend kicked him out and called him a wimp, not a wolf. That rejection became his stated reason for everything that followed. He wanted to prove he was a lone wolf. A man took 9 lives because his girlfriend called him a wimp. That is where this story begins. And where it goes from there is worse. Bychkov targeted the men no one would miss. Elderly alcoholics, homeless individuals, and drifters who passed through the small town without leaving a trace. He offered them what they wanted most: a drink and a warm place to sleep. Then he ended their lives using knives and hammers. He dismembered every single body, a process he carried out in his home, and buried the remains either in his own backyard or at the municipal rubbish dump on the edge of town. He claimed to have consumed the livers, hearts, and muscles of his victims, cooking the organs in cabbage broth on his kitchen stove, though the act of cannibalism was never formally charged because investigators could not produce sufficient physical evidence to meet the legal standard. What they did find was his diary, a handwritten journal in which he referred to himself throughout as a lone wolf and described each act in meticulous, disturbing detail. In a critical and devastating failure of the local justice system, a mentally ill man named Alexander Juplov was arrested in September 2010 and falsely convicted of the first 3 cases that had been discovered, while Bychkov continued operating freely, completely undetected, for another 1.5 years. It was the same pattern that repeated across case after case in Russia. An innocent person, often someone marginalized, mentally unwell, or unable to adequately defend themselves, was arrested and convicted to close a case, while the actual perpetrator was left untouched and free to continue. Every life Bychkov took after Zhuplov's wrongful conviction was a direct consequence of that failure. Bychkov was caught entirely by accident, and the manner of his discovery is almost absurd given what he had been doing. On the night of January 21st, 2012, he broke into a local hardware store and stole 3 knives and 9,908 rubles, a petty burglary worth roughly $300. He was arrested for the break-in days later. It was a routine matter. But when police searched his home as part of standard procedure, they found something that transformed a minor theft case into the most significant criminal discovery in the town's history. A personal diary in which the author, referring to himself throughout as a lone wolf, claimed responsibility for 11 separate acts and described each one in extensive, graphic detail. The handwriting was unmistakably Bychkov's. Under questioning, he confessed fully and led investigators to 6 sets of remains buried in his own backyard, feet from where he slept every night. He was convicted of 9 confirmed counts on March 22, 2013, and sentenced to life imprisonment. He is currently held at IK5 Fiery Island in Vologda Oblast, the same facility housing Artyom Anufriev from earlier on this list. In 2024, Bychkov married Christina War, an American woman who discovered his case online in 2018 and began corresponding with him. War has publicly professed belief in his innocence and outlined plans to petition for his transfer to the United States. Plans that legal experts have described as having no realistic prospect of success. They conceived a child during a prison visit who was born in the United States. Bychkov remains at Fiery Island with no possibility of release. He wanted to prove he was not a wimp. 9 men who had done nothing to him paid for that proof with their lives. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.